Okay, this is the fifth lecture for chapters 15, or excuse me, chapters 16 and 17, and looking at some renewable energy resources and comparing different countries. We can see that the EU, European Union, they get about 22% of their electricity from renewables. Costa Rica, a very small country, gets about 92%, and China is listed here to invest a whole bunch either. And then just in comparison, I'm not sure why this is a lighter color, but we can see that California is, setting out to have some very ambitious plans in the next 15 to 20 years. There we go. And again, just some more comparisons looking at Denmark and Brazil. They also are making some big inputs into some renewable energy resources. So one of the things that typically comes up on a test, I've seen it on a few, is what would be a good plan as far as designing a house. And one of the ways they always say is, well, your house should face south. So think about your house. Here we live in a northern latitude, and what's the maximum elevation the sun can get to where we live here? We're at about 42 degrees latitude. And if you answered it should be about 23.5 degrees latitude, that's about right. It's the Tropic of Cancer up where we live. So all of our homes should face to the south for maximum sun exposure in the winter. So if you have a shade tree, a non-coniferous tree, but a shade tree that loses its leaves in the fall, you're going to get the sun's rays coming down and hopefully through some windows in the winter. But in the summer, when the sun's at its high level, hopefully those sun's rays will get blocked by the shade tree. So that's a good design. And again, having these windows facing the south, maybe a little overhang to help prevent the sun from coming in the summer. All these things are good innovations. And skylights and everything else. But a couple other things you can see. Going along with this as far as some passive solar heating, the main idea with that is there's no mechanism involved. The sun is directly heating something in the house. It's holding the heat and releasing it slowly. You start throwing fans in and mechanicals into that. That's called active solar heating. Slightly different, slightly less efficient, but still better than using a non-renewable. So some of these things we mentioned earlier to cool your house. Geothermal, I think we'll pick that up a little bit later, so we won't mention it right now. And again, just using a comparison between different fossil fuels, renewables, and some non-solars. You can look at this on your own. This one here, these numbers are slightly different from what we have here. This is a pretty old resource. We get the idea. This is 2004, but just to have some updated numbers, this is the cost, the total cost when you say, okay, how much does it cost to generate this stuff? How much is the cost to the environment? And so what is the total cost of these substances? These numbers, obviously you can see them, but to look at some numbers that were predicted out to 2018, we can see that wind would be right about 8.6 cents per kilowatt hour. And then to look at hydropower, that's listed at 9. Natural gas is anywhere between 6 and 10.5. So that's lower than actually you might think, listed on here anyways. Next one on here, coal, is 12.3. And there's a couple different numbers on there, but I picked 12.3. I think it was the lowest on the list that I had. Geothermal is 9. Biomass is 11. Whoops, I lost my 9. I'll put the 9 back in there. 11. Nuclear is 10.8. And then solar cells are still expensive at 14.4. So that is a huge hindrance for solar. We like the idea of it. It's obviously the majority of the energy that comes to the earth, but the total production of it based on these cells themselves are still very expensive. So what are the best ones to pursue? As we've been looking at predictions, natural gas is one of the things we like to bridge into. But we also have some other cheap ones out there. Geothermal is a great resource we'll talk about later. Hydropower, of course, that's only located in so many different places. And of course, wind. So those are all pretty good energy sources to pursue. This is like a solar array, so all of these are pointing up towards this tower here to focus all that energy on. It's a different type of solar production and electricity production. So hydro, we've pretty much exploited that to its full potential. 98% of suitable locations, we've done it. So we're pretty much getting the energy that we can. Not so for tides. There's two different types of tides that we can talk about. You can look at currents like the Detroit River, water just flowing. That's an energy source that we could try to capture. But then there's locations that actually have tides, of course, moving in and out. But as far as making it worth our while, there's only about 4 or 5 locations on the entire planet that really have good tides that we could actually use as an energy resource. I'm not sure why we couldn't use like currents, like I mentioned, the Detroit River. I don't know. And this is just kind of the guts that go into producing hydropower. This is not necessarily by the water cycle per se. Yeah, the water is, of course, flowing from one place to another, and the water cycle is involved. But as far as this generation goes, we can really back away from anything that's solar on this. This is simply just by impounding water and passing it through a network, we can harness its electrical ability or energy ability. Okay, wind. People get kind of excited about the wind power. We certainly have been building a lot of these in Michigan more recently. And again, it's a great energy resources, and some places in the country have a huge potential for it. Looking at the amount of energy, this is a nice little bullet point here. If we only use 20% of the energy, we could have more than we need. Now, it's probably unrealistic to look at 20%, but it gives a nice little talking point. So the idea of a wind farm, as far as the guts that go into it, how is it created? It's the same idea as the water. With the steam, you're turning a generator or a turbine, and that creates our electricity. One of the drawbacks that people talk about is with these birds flying in. Bird flies in, hits the blades, and dies. These things are not like chippers that are killing birds. One, they've kind of slowed down the blades by design, so they're not necessarily killing birds as much as they used to. But there's a lot more potent bird killers out there. For example, cats. No one's out there saying we need to get rid of all the cats because they kill birds. Cats kill birds by the millions every year. There's probably estimated in the tens of thousands of birds that are killed by these windmills. So comparatively, windmills are not going to eliminate birds. So we did a pretty good job as far as starting off with wind production, but we kind of have fallen behind. And again, a lot of it has to do with our love affair of oil. We really like oil because there's a lot of money involved in it. There's not as much money involved in the production of wind. There's not the profit there. Biomass, that's one thing we looked at, and we'll do a little activity on that. Mostly looking at corn and soybeans, but it is another resource that we can go after. You can pause this and take a look at that slide if you'd like to. So just making a comparison between modern carbon and fossil carbon, this is a really good point that you should be aware of. Even though they both put CO2 in the atmosphere, they're different. When you're looking at biomass, you're looking at CO2 that was taken out of the atmosphere a short time ago, relatively speaking, and then you're putting it right back in. So you're just cycling the carbon back and forth into the atmosphere and into some type of biomass. Compared to coal, which has been have carbon taken out or sequestered from the atmosphere for millions of years and then putting it into the atmosphere, you're really just adding carbon to the pots or the atmosphere. So the second one, the fossil carbon, is a bad usage, whereas using biomass, whether that be wood, charcoal, manure, whatever, is a better usage. Okay. And a lot of this we already just kind of mentioned here. Some of the different sources. Switchgrass is something that's mentioned quite a bit as far as one for just production of a biofuel, Corn, we mentioned, is a really good one. Sugarcane is another one. But interestingly, switchgrass can also just be used to grow and just sequester and keep CO2 out of the atmosphere. Okay, good place to stop. Lecture number 5.